Hi, everyone. My name is Louisa. I'm part of the International Department of the 32 County Sovereignty Movement. And so I was asked to speak today a little bit about the work that we do here in so-called Canada. I'm located out of Montreal. So just wanted to speak a little bit about the idea of a border poll and the idea of, asking permission from your oppressor for freedom, or asking permission from your oppressor for sovereignty. What's going on right now in Ireland with the question of the border poll, for those that don't know, is this idea that you can ask do a poll to see if the border for the if a hard border, what they would call a hard border, would be accepted if the north of Ireland would stay in the UK, if they would want to do an all Ireland national project, and what that would look like. And so our position as the 32 County Sovereignty Movement, you can look at the 2 other live videos regarding why we feel like it's a sham. I wanted to talk a little bit about the idea about how we can conceive of that here in Canada. So part of our mandate in the International Department here in Canada is to support the struggles for Indigenous sovereignty. And I think that particularly in Quebec, the question of sovereignty is important when we talk about borders and when we talk about what does sovereignty mean. The reason why people are Republicans is because they reject the idea of nobility, right? So the Queen can't rule you because the idea of royalty is that the Queen or King is God's representative on earth. And the idea of a republic is that your belonging to the nation or society is based not on the blood that runs through your veins, but your participation in society, your contribution and your respect of the common good. So that was the idea that's why my understanding of why the liberation movement in Ireland, that's why Irish Republicans call themselves Irish Republicans, because they believe in the idea of a republic. And it's hard for me to conceive of the idea of a republic without it necessarily being socialist. And what I mean by that is that if you have a republic where it's not one family that can rule over another, and that we understand that your belonging to the nation and your ability to lead a life of dignity and realize your full potential is not based on where you're from or who you're related to, but it's based on your merit and your respect for the rules of society, then what we are looking at is the common good. So socialists have always been Republicans, and the 2 go together. So to understand, to think of Ireland as being able to be a republic without being socialist is ridiculous. When you don't have your sovereignty, it means that what your society is organized to do is to serve another nation, right? So the way that your economy is organized isn't serving your own people. It's either serving a small class of exploiters, or it's serving another nation completely. And so when we look at how Canada was built, you have the idea of colonizers coming in and signing treaties and creating these borders, as opposed to, maybe the idea of coming into the society and trying to integrate with the people there. They obviously created these borders in order to say, we don't have the same interests as you. And then they always necessarily break whatever treaties that they supposedly sign. So when we talk about borders, we have to make sure that we're looking at the underlying issues of sovereignty. When we look at Quebec sovereignty, for example, the idea of Quebec sovereignty and the idea of the nation of Quebec, yes, it came from a common history. Yes, it came from a common language. Yes, it came from people that shared different cultural practices for a long time. But fundamentally, the nationalist movement in Quebec came from the fact that the people, the French-speaking people of the province, were being exploited and oppressed as a nation. And so when we're looking at the idea of requesting or getting permission from the oppressor to put down your borders, are we really looking at the fundamental issue of sovereignty, which is that those who are producing the wealth are able to benefit from it, and that the society is actually organized in a way where you can get people. There's a lot of people joining. It's a bit distracting, but what society would be organized in a way where we would be serving people not based on their cultural belonging or their genetic makeup or their relatives. We would be serving, our society is organized in a way to serve those based on the fact that they agreed to live there. So it's the idea of a socialist republic go together necessarily, and we can't think of, you can't think of whether it be Indigenous sovereignty, whether it be Quebec sovereignty, or whether it be Irish sovereignty. You can't conceive of those things. You can't say we are a republic unless you have the common good being shared among the masses, among the people. And that should not be about an apartheid system where you have, people who are treated better because of where they come from. And I think if you look at the history of the treaties and how, the treaties are an important tool, but the treaties are also, clearly identifying that like people wanted to kind of demarcate, the colonizers wanted to demarcate land because they wanted to dominate. They didn't want to share. And so borders can be very useful for people that are under attack. And I think that when a sovereign nation asserts their borders is important, but when you have a nation that doesn't actually have sovereignty, you can't have an outsider decide about when and where the border will be established and how it will be established. And as far as Quebec sovereignty goes, if you don't understand the relationship between the oppression that the French Canadian people went through and why they had a nationalist movement, you can't understand why they wanted to use borders as a way to kind of assert their sovereignty. And I think it also goes to show the way, some of the best ways that you can co-opt the movement of an oppressed people is to make it about a vote for a border. When we all know that voting doesn't equal, well, maybe we don't all know this, but I believe that voting doesn't equal democracy. Democracy is the will of the people being expressed in a continuous way that is collectively synthesized and can change over time. So having a poll or a vote to assert your sovereignty is largely insufficient in the way that we conceive of sovereignty as sharing of the common good and the creation of a shared project. So that's kind of the perspective of how we understand our connection to the 32 county sovereignty movement's rejection of the border poll on the one hand, and on the other hand, what lessons can we learn and what have we learned from history here in Montreal, in Quebec, in Canada, and why voting in your sovereignty doesn't work, and how unless you have a movement of the masses to reclaim the democratic control over the economy, to serve all the people, you will never attain your sovereignty and you'll never attain your republic. Thank you for joining me. How do I end this? Here we go. Bye, guys.